It's worth opening this video with an item description that can crystallize an idea the Dark Souls trilogy toys with throughout the series. It says, a lump of something, obtainable from a giant tree, makes enemies react to invaders. When the giants fell, they grew into great trees. Death is not the end, for anything that has ever once lived remains a part of the great cycle of regeneration. But what of those outside of the cycle? That's from the Seed of a Tree of Giants in Dark Souls 2. It's the very fact that this description outright says that there is a cycle of regeneration that's important for everyone to consider. It's literal, it's in text, you know. Um, Life and death, light and dark, this disparity isn't just black and white, separate opposites, but it's also causal. They loop around, they're innately tied to each other. You know, hot turns to cold. Get cold enough, and the frostbite will certainly feel like heat. Life turns to death, and one day death will return to life in a different form. Agdane's armor set also allows this relationship to be filled in terms in the idea of karma, which you can look at as a spiritual concept and yield great rewards here. It calls into question that death is the end to suffering. Indeed, it seems as if Agdane's presence is to confirm suffering continues long after death and Halloween. Agdane is protecting the undead crypt, preventing agitators from bringing light in and disturbing the souls currently at peace. Likewise, the watch dragon Parma, which seems to have primordial serpents on the shield, seems to call them dragons that watch over the ebb and flow of all things living. This plays into the larger cycle, death and life, light and dark. It's not just on the minute scale of your own self. This cycle of life and death being a regenerative process applies to the entire world and is manifested within the first flame in the events of our world. When it says, what of those outside the cycle, this cycle of karma and suffering, I would say it's innately tied to the Buddhist ideas regarding transcendence of suffering, and also really mostly applies to dragons of the series, specifically uncorrupted true dragons, but even descendants of archdragons seem to be immortal, to a certain extent, given like the Ring City Knights dragon shields. So it can be probably applied a bit more broadly. Dragons are seen as a hardened philosophy of withstanding the cycle of the world and enduring it, like a mountain would. Archdragon Peak and the Path of the Dragon can also be seen through this lens, as well as the other ideas regarding nothingness and lifelessness. The Petrified Egg in Dark Souls 2 is an object of worship and reverence, but it's also a hollow egg. There's no life inside it. It's a sign of the abandonment of the material life. To remove it from spirituality, it's just a hollow rock, a geode, but that removes a lot of the nuance and subtlety as to what this idea of nothingness is trying to convey. Another example, if you're still stuck on this idea, is Aldia's own research into dragons, as Aldia seems very concerned with the ability to escape the scope of light and the reach of dark, and a large portion of his research is focused on the idea of creating dragons. If dragons are beings who can transcend the cycle, then it also makes perfect sense snakes, as imperfect dragons, are innately tied to the idea of cycle of life in the world. Not only are they symbols of the undead, the idea of Ouroboros as a symbol seems closely related to the dark sign, but this protection and watching over time seems to thematically anchor them to the suffering material world. They want to perpetuate this reality and maintain this reality. Like a snake shedding its skin, they prefer the process of renewal and this reality over any sort of transcendence. Be it light or dark, that part does not matter. There's a snake for either choice because the choice doesn't matter. What does this circle of life teach us about the events of Dark Souls? Dark Souls 2 deals with this concept of time and the cyclical nature of all things, the most. Other games incorporate the idea of cycle and progression of time as themes, but Dark Souls 2 removed a lot of the original subject matter and content from the previous game to refer to as a source material. It maintained its identity as a Dark Souls sequel through emphasizing and examining this as a cycle of repeating patterns. That is, you don't see Gwyn in the game, and you don't see other famous celebrities from the first game. But there's a similar iconography and iterations, and whenever they can, they do put something similar to a reference. Dark Souls 2 uses this idea of repeating patterns and repeating imagery to explore the idea of identity through this cycle and passage of time. It's easiest to see in gameplay through locations. Some locations feel eerily similar to prior locations, culturally or otherwise. Hade seems to have incorporated an Orlando imagery. The Falcon statue in Hade resembles Gwyn, and the Lion Knight seems to clearly have been from Ornstein's time, if not Ornstein himself. The gutter feels like Blighttown with its ramshackle, lived in waste. These echoes are intentional by the developer and evoke ideas of cultural adoption and transformation. Roman culture looked at Greek culture. Even now, as we decorate Christmas trees to celebrate the birth of Christ, the reality of the date and time is more related to pagan winter solstice celebrations. History remains in the shadow of what it is now and is transformed as the years go on. To put it in an even simpler way, time is a circle. What has happened before will happen again, but it will happen in different ways that might tell us something. Largely, all of it will play out again. This is actually a big part of identity. Earlier this year, I made an entire video regarding identity and how Dark Souls 2 tackled that early in 2021. Someone actually made a comment in that video acknowledging a very important aspect of identity that I didn't really talk about at all. This video is now addressing it. It's the fact that your identity is not entirely unique to you. You are fulfilling roles and archetypes already universally established. Sure, you're doing them a little differently than you remember or other people have expected of you, but you are still ultimately derivative. You can also be different archetypes at once. Life is flexible like that. We'll address Shanalot, Vendrick, and Aldia and some other concepts in a bit. Probably the most visible reoccurrence and thematic repetition in Dark Souls 2 are the old ones, resembling the Lord Souls of Dark Souls 1. It's blatant, but it's also bare enough to be confusing. What's going on here? First of all, I'm going to address something that some people might disagree with. I think New Game Plus is kind of sort of canon. Not the experience of New Game Plus, but rather some of the significance of the idea of it and some of the items within, especially in Dark Souls 2 for multiple reasons. Dark Souls 2 plays much more into the ideas of New Game Plus and integrates them into the core experience, and even provides unique ways to enjoy New Game Plus without completing the game. This is all to say, I regard the old souls that drop from the old ones in the New Game Plus as canon. If you don't, that's fine. But there's actually a lot to explore with these souls, so stick around anyways to see if we can't learn something. I think the most concise explanation for what's going on is either that archetypes are fulfilled by the flame taking shape, and certain souls develop into these roles, creating a burdened soul that continues forward. And there's another idea that these legendary souls eventually possess these forming souls. There's a little bit of both going on here. I think there's enough evidence to support both. The main game, Writhing Ruin, is probably the easiest example of what I'm talking about. First of all, I'm going to point out Shalkor's dialogue for all of the old ones. They seem a bit ambiguous as to whom they're referring to for the most part. For each parallel, Shalkor seems to have her thoughts applied to both the original and new version of these old ones. Second, Manscorpion Tark actually gives us quite a bit of commentary on the Writhing Ruin, which we can debate the semantics of whether or not it's the Duke of Zeldora. Personally, I think the timeline of events is, and this could be wrong, the Duke of Zeldora was born with a flaw that made him lonely and envious. He developed an obsession to spiders. His obsession manifested more in the minds of Zeldora, especially on the discovery of the ancient dragon corpse. And also, to mention here as a footnote, Aldia had a part specifically in that. This obsession started to twist his soul. This is what Seath's soul actually is. Madness brought about by obsession. All creatures that have similar madness by obsession manifest Seath's eternal soul in the form of reincarnation, in the form of, this perpetual karma. Now, the form and goal of the obsession can change, but eventually that obsession and insecurity takes hold. The inside is the ancient dragon corpse. Probably because Seath is the writhing ruin wants scales in the exterior of a dragon. He wants to be an immortal dragon and not with the primordial crystal here. In this, he probably wants to be immortal through the cycles. He wants to be ascended, if you will. And instead, his obsession and treachery and selfishness and want, he's forever bound to this cycle of regeneration, especially since he's received the Lord Soul from Gwyn. He's trapped in the cycle of karma by his own hand. This is actually a good time to bring about other sources to see what I mean here. Osiris is another great example, in my opinion, of this reincarnation by obsession. He's a one-to-one visual callback to Seath, but more importantly, he produces the Moonlight Greatsword from his soul. This may baffle some, because the description says Osiris chased Moonlight and he never found it. I think this is what's really important to realize. Seath's Moonlight Greatsword is not pure moonlight. It's not the only singular moonlight. It's what it is the obsession. It is the search for that moonlight. That's what's manifested into the sword. What really helps seal this deal is the fact that Seath's Moonlight Greatsword is not Dark Souls canon's original Moonlight Greatsword. When you play Dark Souls 3 and you take Midir's soul seems to have a memory of a kind of Moonlight Greatsword, or at the very least, it's a spell manifesting as a Moonlight Greatsword that explicitly predates Seath the Scaleless's. Now, taking a step back, this is a Kingsfield reference. Gyra, the Black Dragon of Kingsfield, was the original dragon associated with the Moonlight Greatsword. Eventually, they switched it a bit. But for what this tells us in the story is this sorcery predated Seath and is beyond Seath's own being. Seath is searching for his own power of moonlight, and the other dragons seem to remember at least a sorcery of it. So when these souls manifest and transpose the Moonlight Greatsword, what's coming out is the essential obsession that is possessing the person. Manscorpion Targ even says out loud, sort of, emphasizing this idea that his master doesn't die. His master changes forms, and he will seethe, in case things are not explicit enough or obvious enough for you, for all eternity. But ignoring that, and all that was also, by the way, mostly in New Game. I don't have to cite New Game Plus descriptions for any of that. But what are some of the messier characters here? The Lost Sinner seems to be more explicit in identity by in-game cutscene. That's really useful here. The Lost Sinner, when you go into the room, has a chaos bug within her, and the scratchings on the cell are of Izalith scratchings. This chaos bug is ultimately the same kind of chaos bug that is in the bed of chaos, and I think personally is literally the bed of chaos. And that's literally what you have to kill in the first game to kill the bed of chaos. As well as the idea that sorcerers pop up in New Game Plus, but we're going to ignore that. With two of these, we see possession as a core concept of reincarnation. So the bug literally possesses the Lost Sinner once it goes into her. But also, these people are making similar mistakes to before. We ask the question, what do Flame Weapon and Chaos Blade tell us? Chaos Blade in particular is strange because it comes from Quelaag, no? Well, if you look at Dark Souls 1's version, it's actually saying it only came from the chaos part of Quelaag, not the essential Quelaag self. Looking at all three games' versions of Chaos Blade informs a lot about chaos and what chaos is. Particularly in 3, it says, granted life but never welcome in this world. Something that fits Lost Sinner to a T. And likewise, in 2, also defines the blade as an alluring vortex and lonely soul. It's not that the Lost Sinner is secretly always the Witch of Izalith. It's that the sinner birthing chaos has created that same sort of chaos. Shalkawar even says she tries to light the first flame. Some people read the kanji as inherit the first flame. which means link. I think other people read it as sort of making a separate flame, which would be what the Witch of Izalith did in the first game. She tried to make a separate first flame, like a brand new one, and then it went to shit. And she is making the same mistake as the Witch of Izalith did. And that's the point where the soul and the cycle and the bug are repeating themselves. You know, Lost Center is also uniquely tied to pyromancy and sorcery, particularly pyromancy, but the sorcery part is important in regards to the Lost Center and flame weapon. Specifically, flame weapon cites that even though pyromancy and sorcery seem to be like oil and water, that, you know, and by that means complete opposites that do not go well together, they share a similar origin. Um, in my opinion, this origin point is either, and probably possibly both, the primordial dark sorceries or the flame sorceries the witches used before chaos happened. And ultimately, pyromancy and soul sorcery are still manipulation of flame. Um, I'm mostly inclined for dark sorcery, at least in a reading. I think there's an alternative reading that's justified here. The Izalith staff in Dark Souls 3 boosts the power of dark sorcery, and it was used before chaos and used before pyromancy. Obviously, the Izalith staff was used for flame sorcery. Don't get it twisted. And the witch definitely dabbled in flame sorcery, but I think there's probably a little bit of mixing going on with that, especially when you look at the idea of Black Serpent in Dark Souls 3, which states both pyromancy and sorcery infringe on humanity. Anyways, what's important here is the Lost Center seems to be in the deepest, most secure part of the Bastille. The Bastille was a place where multiple kingdoms, most notably Olafus, threw in undesirables, mostly undead, sometimes others. In a way, it resembles the undead asylum of Dark Souls 1 by to keep calling on patterns. Many undead went there, but straight is proof that they threw in anybody that had a threat to the authority. They threw anybody into the Bastille that posed a threat. So the Lost Sinner might very well be paying the price for her hubris, and they've punished her just like everyone else. Shalquar talking about rounding up the undead inside the Bastille whilst talking about the Lost Sinner, you know, probably the most specific old one she talks about, puts this in context as well. She says very specifically, Lost Sinners in the Bastille, basically, and they threw everyone in the Bastille that's a threat, sort of unifying the idea of sorcery and pyromancy together within the Lost Sinner and what this means for sorcerers, generally speaking. And big thanks to Rubito, by the way, as a side note. I didn't come up with this idea on my own, and I also converse with him on most of these readings. The idea of reading the Old One's souls to inform the characters of current Old Ones helps more so with the idea of like the Rotten and the Old Iron King. I think here we can really understand a lot of what's going on. These are where the metaphors and repetition also go into dodgy territory because of conflicting information or lack thereof. You know, the I don't mean to sugarcoat it here. The Rotten has like very little lore, and the Old Iron King is, in contrast, a huge mess of lore that conflicts with each other and even the rest of the franchise's content. So it's a prickly pear. The Old Dead One's soul does not immediately invoke Nito. It does, but it also doesn't borrow anything from Dark Souls 1. Instead, Dark Souls 2 invented new Nito lore, which I really liked, and started to explore these ideas. The Crypt Black Sword, derived from the Old Dead One's soul, is from Agdane, and Agdane refers to his master as the one who gave us the first death. Milfinito's dress also directly cites a Great Dead One, and it makes pretty obvious that Nito is tied to the origins of both the Finito and the Milfinito here. I don't think this is crazy information for anybody. Nito's in the fucking name of both of them. But what informs the Rotten is the Numbness Hex. This Numbness Hex is kind of bizarre in the context of everything else. First of all, it questions the material reality of light and flame. Normally, when we talk about Dark Souls and when we look at what the first flame is, it talks about the material and talks about the world, and it talks about, when there's light, there is reality. And when it goes out, we don't know what's going to happen to reality. But the Numbness Hex calls this into question. It says, what is observed exists. What can't be observed does not exist. But it also says that there's far too many exceptions to make this a reality. It's an unproven rule because there's so many exceptions that it's not actually a rule. you know um for me, and I think the point of the spell, I think it's referring to pain. Pain is what you're not observing when you darken the self and you darken your sights, at least effectively during the hex. um I think what it speaks to the rotten is, it directly ties to the rotten because the rotten is a remnant of trash. He's leftovers. His soul says the rotten embraces all in the sanctuary for all things unwanted or tossed away. Majula as a town was framed as Aldia's garbage dump, and the pit in Majula especially so. That's what the gutter ends up becoming. And the rotten in this culmination of the unwanted, this is not entirely, by the way, Nito's identity. Nito's identity is not just the trash. Instead, what's going on in the game is the Ron embodies this specific aspect of Nito. This dead trash that's welcoming to all. That's what's coming back in this specific cycle. I also didn't mention it earlier, but it just came to the top of my head. We also hear of other old ones in between, the Dark Souls 1 old ones, which Strayed refers to because the Witch of Izalith fought against quote unquote the old ones. So they are connected, and obviously it's referring to Dark Souls 1's Lord Souls, but also Vendrick vanquished the old souls during his original time and journey to become king. So we are explicitly told of 3 generations of old ones. Anyways, a good way to sort of refocus this Nito conversation and the Rotten conversation and contrast it is Dark Souls 3's Nito analog, Aldrich, the Saint of the Deep. To talk about their similarities real quick and just go over why someone would think Aldrich is Nito 3.0. Nito has some of Aldrich has some of Nito's theme incorporated into his main theme. He also has Gwendolyn's theme in there, of course. And he also has a Gravelord Scythe attack. Here, Aldrich is also just a giant pile of corpses, and like the Rotten and Nito, but it's also more sinister. More specifically, it seems as if Aldrich is embodying the deep and the ominous threat of death, and has consumed dregs. You are what you eat, and Aldrich has eaten so much humanity, he's bloated into these dregs, which are also wasteful and sink to the bottom and are heavy with sin. He's received visions of the deep and now the waters, and the deep waters of death, basically, that binds the world. The heaviest things to the human soul, which are now a part of him, and they are now trying to consume and drown everything else out. Here, I think of death as the idea of consumption. That's what Aldrich represents as the idea of death, of an impending force like a rising tide that's going to swallow the first flame and it's going to drown it. These are not purely Nito, by the way. Nito is not only the idea of death as consumption. Nito is just a general spooky Grim Reaper guy. But these are aspects to the archetype Nito himself represented as the first of the dead. And as, these different things come up, there's another Dark Souls 3 possible Nito analog. If you're not gelling with this Aldrich parallel, which is, and I'm saying this off the top of the dome, this is not scripted, but Wolnir. Wolnir hoped to be the last of the dead, at least according to the Japanese kanji. I think that's also in the English. But anyways, he wanted to be the last of the dead, a direct mirror to and bookend to the first of the dead as Nito. And he is also a corpse of a bunch of skeletons on top of a giant skeleton. So there is a mixing here of ideas, and the different archetypes that you manifest as you go on your journey for power. Let's go ahead and move on from the Nito and Rotten subject here, and then we get to the Old Iron King. Uh, very complex lore figure for the old ones. Probably because he has his own story and content far beyond this conversation we're having today. And I'm not going to be going over all that. You know, he's got DLC. He's got a lot going on. Instead, we are just going to be focusing on the ways he might be related to Gwyn. There's an argument he's not related to Gwyn at all, and that is going to be heard and discussed here too. Let's look at what Shalquar says about him. She describes a vainglorious liar who ended up hurling himself into the flames. Now he is Icarus Earth. This is important. We're going to remember all of this. First of all, let's define what Icarus Earth is. It's actually a proper noun. She's not making any euphemism or any turn of phrase. The old Iron King's soul says he succumbed to the flames that swallowed his castle, and his soul was possessed by the things that lurk below. Likewise, we see him trying to create golems and demons and dragons. Supposedly, he did create a dragon that killed him, and that may just be a weird way of saying it's a smelter demon. Maybe he made an iron dragon. I personally, my headcanon's rooting for an iron dragon. Come on, Iron Dragon, I need it, baby. The smelter demons seem to resemble what the old Iron King looks like now. It seems as if he's become a lava monster. Indeed, the Iron King hammer also frames this Icarus Earth as molten rock. The corpse, uh, the corpse of the old Iron King became the vessel that bred Icarus Earth. This is a direct quote. So this isn't even technically the old Iron King. It is, but Shalquar is right. We're not fighting the old Iron King. We are fighting Icarus Earth that has possessed the old Iron King. What could possibly be the thing that lurks below? The crown of the old Iron King says as he sank into the scorching iron, he met the one whose name must never be repeated. This also ties in with the idea of the old ones of New Game Plus being ineffable. And to go further into this, if you're curious as to what Icarus Earth even means from a etymological standpoint, what the fucking words are bit by bit, the Earth part is evident. But Icarus actually refers to a very specific word meaning god blood. It's the blood of ancient Greek gods and shit. This specific word and citation really feels like what's going on is that Gwyn, or and I think this is important here and probably canon, an archetype or old one similar to Gwyn, that if you really want to get technical about the linking drama, we're going to talk about the Soul of Cinder and all that shit real later. Gwyn linked, or another guy linked, or something, and has been burning. And as the worlds and kingdoms have been building on top of each other, and I mean this literally, they talk about layers of the same kingdoms building on top of each other, the old Iron King's antics brought the hot magma gods from layers down below, and now they've possessed him. The old Iron King soul directly calls back to Gwyn. Likewise, seems to have curious choices. Honestly, I don't have an answer for what the Dragon Slayer Greatbow is. I think the Dragon Slayer Greatbow is just there to be there and make it obvious that it's a Gwyn soul. The blinding bolt miracle I think is really interesting though. The blinding bolt miracle is the Gwyn miracle from Dark Souls 2 and does not exist in Dark Souls 1. And they chose to make one of these instead of an older Gwyn item. It's a completely new miracle. So what does it say and what does it do? Crafted in ancient times by the god of the sun, but later forbidden by the same deity. Was it to protect the world from hatred or sorrow? This reads really weird. Translators have tried to tackle how this is in their own takes on it. And I think the consensus for multiple sources, at least the ones I've talked to, is it means that Gwyn had forbidden the miracle. And it was to protect the world from the miracle's own hatred or lamentation. The miracle is evidence here, I think, of Gwyn's own weakness. That is, the miracle shoots a beam of light high into the air and shoots lightning out. This seems to narratively play into the idea that perhaps this was a miracle Gwyn used to try to fight back the dark, but it didn't work. It's a miracle of weakness, of Gwyn at his moral lowest. It's a miracle to show that shows how ugly Gwyn is. If you're curious to see if this miracle is still canon, to me personally, and you can disagree here, a version of the miracle conceivably exists in Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls three's iteration of Gwyn is in the Soul of Cinder, the second half of the fight. And Soul of Cinder does a similar miracle. He throws a dark cloud up into the sky, and lightning bolts track you like a homing thing. To me, this is even more thematically developed into what I'm talking about here, as the idea of the miracle, because they got rid of the bolt or the blinding sun part. It seems as if the lightning is coming from the dark place. It's coming from a dark thunder cloud that Gwyn has summoned. Either way, the concept of a blinding bolt is a cursed light. Blinding light is not a light that that guides. It's a light that doesn't reveal or illuminate thematically. That blindness, in other terms, is a light so strong that it loops back around and becomes what dark is, obscuring. It obscures, as if it's not a pure half and half, but rather these concepts are flexible and synonymous with each other. This ugly miracle is, in my opinion, what stuck around and came back. It's what's possessing the old Iron King. This part is what the Iron King represents to Gwyn. The old Iron King does not represent the whole of Gwyn. I think there's a conversation to be had about Gwyn making choices for the good of his people, or as a righteous monarch, or for his family, or his selflessness, etc., etc. But for here, for the old Iron King, he's Gwyn with the least charitable readings. He's vain, he's a hedonist, he's selfish, foolish enough to play with fire before he gets burned. And that's where the narrative is really powerful here. You go to a visit to Broom Tower, which also showcases a kingdom covered in ash and soot. And the bottom of the tower is basically another kiln. Dark Souls 2 went for a different direction for what linking and sacrifice ultimately mean. I think this part is something that's retconned, by the way, or at least shifted around by Dark Souls 3. I mean, Gwyn is part of the First Flame, and the Soul of Cinder is clearly still kicking. More on this idea again later. We're going to address Soul of Cinder, I promise. Some people have instead theorized that the old Iron King's soul is the return of the Four Kings, because the Four Kings were foolish and selfish and had a fragment of Gwyn's soul. So this, in a way, makes sense. It makes sense. It's also technically flooded. New Londo is flooded. The old Iron Keep was drowned by lava. And I don't think it's a wild reading at all. If you personally believe it, it makes complete sense and could possibly, probably be the case when we consider all three games' canonicity. But I don't think this was intended for Dark Souls 2. And I don't think this idea was completely abandoned either. Irithyll has Dark Souls 2 paintings in the one painting room. More curiously, it has Broom Tower's Ashen Throne from the top of the tower as a painting in the forefront. To me, this might be the Irithylian acknowledgement of this entire concept or recognition of Gwyn. Or in the lightest terms, it might just be a way for Dark Souls 3's developers to, sort of play with the idea that Dark Souls 2 did play with ashes before, and 3 chose to do it in a completely different way. As a side note here, also not scripted, and I'm just saying it off the cuff. Uh, a fun thing to think about is Dark Souls 2 deals with Ash as sort of the ruins that you cannot find answers to. So like they are the memories, but they are the lost memories. The undead bone dust says Ash, Ash tells no tales. There's the Ashen Mist Heart, which allows you to go into memories, but it's also an obscuring mist. So there's sort of a conflicting idea here of whether or not Ash is Ash does Ash obscure or what. But that being said, Dark Souls 3 is much more concrete in the idea of Ash as a legacy thing, as a recyclable thing, especially with the Ashen one, and the idea that you use Ash to recover items from the merchants. Um, Anyways, with these old ones talked about, we still haven't gotten anywhere closer to this big idea. We just went on a giant tangent. I think for a reason. If you think it was for no reason, you've probably left the video by now. But that's because there's so many ways to go with this concept of reincarnation and recurrence. And I think that was just a really big, important one to talk about. Ultimately, I think you could look at each individual a pattern or intentional echo in some thematic way with areas or characters. And examine the context of every single example, and you'll have a different answer for every single time. Ultimately, this is a story about life and death and how each individual chooses to define themselves within the system. This is that aspect of identity. So, like, many of us will hollow away into nothingness as life happens to us, and we will endure suffering for no fucking reason. Likewise, the charms of love seem to be innately tied to life as a concept of happiness and sadness, especially in Dark Souls 2. We can choose to embrace this beautiful life, renounce it, and usher in dark and these, death as natural progression. We can choose to persist through, or we could choose to prolong the age we are in out of comfort, or we could try to escape the cycle completely. These all take different forms in different ways. Linking the first flame is both perpetuating that life and trying to avoid the dark from coming. And to me, this is a foolish attempt, but there's a lot of the series dedicated to people doing it because they feel like they have to. Also, this force of will has created embers that will last far into eternity, as we see in the Firekeeper ending of Dark Souls 3. These embers of lords who have linked will continue to exist in the Age of Dark. Their will is keeping them alive. They choose to not die. They will choose the light. The light will naturally come. And in the grand scheme, these patterns of life have all happened before and will happen again. Dark Souls as a franchise has to be a little coy as to whether or not an Age of Dark has happened before. But the answer is it doesn't matter. It's an unknown. It's that darkness and death and hardship that you can prolong or embrace. But either way, it's just another part of the larger cycle of history that you cannot escape from. And your carbon will enter the ground after you're dead, and you will feed a fucking rabbit with your fed corpse grass. And someone will hunt that rabbit for food, and they will die, and they will become carbon. Um, we are in a cycle of not only beauty but of violence. This cruelty is what Vendrick, Aldia, Strayed, and Shanalot all talk about. Strade's a really good one because he's very explicit about it. When something dies, something is new, or when something dies, something new is born from the ashes. This cycle of renewal is not framed as something beautiful either. It's framed as a grand scheme that we are not part of or privy to. This cycle of renewal is a curse. All of it, every aspect. There's actually a line of sarcasm here that you might not pick up on if you're just mashing the talk button. I didn't really think about it at first either. When he says the cursed ones were imprisoned within this land, of course you came of your own free will. Hey, hey, that's sarcasm. This ties in with the ideas I've said earlier in another video about undead being drawn into Drangleic. But more importantly for here, consider the idea that this process is a prison in itself. There's an irony in what he's acknowledging. What they did was they threw undead into the prison, but the undead continue to visit because they are compelled to. Killing the old ones to continue on the path to becoming king is in itself a prison, something that's portrayed even since the first game as the true fate of the undead, according to Friend. That fate, that mission or duty, that karma, often uses similar words or kanji to consider that ultimate idea. It's a glue that combines all those words together. And the ultimate idea, the actual word for it, is the curse. Um, what's going to be important here is Aldia's dialogue because he frames this dance as something more than just fact. He frames it as an illusion, an intentional cruelty. He talks about us as props on the stage of life, as if we're in a shadow play. We all have our parts and our roles to play, our characters, and the script has been written far in advance. This script has been played hundreds of thousands of times before in different ways, but it's still just a lie. And this goes into Gnostic philosophy and thought. Most importantly, here, it resembles a great visual metaphor involving Plato's cave allegory. That is, this dance of dichotomy between light and dark isn't because they're at odds with each other. They blind us into accepting a false narrative. We are shadows cast by fire as it twists us into these shapes it always has. These archetypes and characters we've seen before, we willingly accept because what other world is there for us? What lies beyond? We have no such concept. And Aldia is trying to find out. Aldia talks if he's about how he's lost everything to get to the point he's at, and now he can't do anything but watch the cycle happen again with a front row seat. Here, if you dig a little bit, you can see another concept that's also paid lip service in Dark Souls 2. The idea that this journey removes self for the sake of the flame. The first flame is all that questing is trying to make you a successor and heir to Gwyn's sacrifice. So as you become king, you're losing all these bits of yourself for the sake of this search and this material curse. You know, that's a very profound example that a lot of content creators have picked up on. I remember one of my first lore videos I watched was Vati talking about the crowns and the power of, the power of a monarch being able to remove the curse, but the curse is actually not gone. It's not over. For me, when I think about the crowns, I think that it's the power of the monarch, from all the strength of the different crowns, that's preventing you from hollowing because it's giving you purpose. But on the other end of the spectrum, you're bound by a completely different curse that's still chipping away at you. Duty and power. With great power comes great responsibility, and that responsibility is the curse now as your king. I say different curse, but that's what I'm trying to get at. All these different curses are the same curse. Are you keeping up with me? I hope you are. I'm going to test you later on this. Be ready. Aldia, in his search, has become outside the cycle and has lost himself in a profound way. First of all, he echoes the line from the introduction cutscene. The line about losing everything, and it's shown right as you lose your family. It's literally that line. The line when the face melts, it's you lose everything. Aldia says that. That he lost everything. We can see through item descriptions that Aldia was also eventually imprisoned in his home and emotionally lost his brother as a family member as they went separate ways. His focus on the first sin produced the forlorn. These are beings without homes, without a corporeal form, where they drift in between worlds, searching for because a lack of self. Aldia has become bound to the bonfires and the throne, a horrifying mess that was once a man, incapable of escaping anything, and only has the ability to reach out to the next victim of the cycle in the hopes that we learn from him. Let's walk it back a bit and look at smaller examples and explore different ideas regarding repetition pattern. Dark Souls 3 has a lot of returning weapons becoming transposed, and often they offer their own unique explanations and different realities here. The Ring of the Embedded from Dark Souls 2 is functionally the same as the Prisoner's Chain in Dark Souls 3. I don't think the Gundyr is a literal reincarnation of the Embedded from Dark Souls 2. I don't think this. I think it's a scenario where you see that they're both chains. Gundyr and the Embedded are symbolically both slaves to something. Gundyr is a slave to duty. The Embedded is a slave to pleasure. The chain is just a representation of these things that bind us to slavery, be it our honor or our senses. The Soul of Lords, that's what you get when you kill the Lord of Sinner, has that's what you get when you kill the Soul of Cinder. Has the Sunlight Spear and name drops Gwyn as the first Lord. The Sunlight Spear reflects the Gwyn part of Soul of Cinder, and also curiously frames the idea of the Age of Fire as political and not metaphysical, as the Age of Fire is made during the war with the dragons, not at the Dawn of Fire. The Firelink Greatsword is removed from Gwyn, and speaks to the other side of Soul of Cinder. It speaks to the coiled sword wrapped in every bonfire, in which all these undead and other hopeful lords to be congregate. It speaks of this sword existing before the throneless lords, essentially saying that the bonfire as a home and this entire system of bonfires and fire linking, as we have it, has been built into the fabric of Soul of Cinder, long before the current roster. That's an important distinction from just saying, this is older than the Lords. It's trying to frame the legacy of Soul of Cinder as a system, the might of steel twisted and curled by the heat of flame, and is always ran through the ash and bones of unfortunate undead. These are the essential elements to the Soul of Cinder. Gwyn's will and the alluring home and prison that is the bonfire and the souls they consume. Rosaria and the Dancer of the Boreal Valley have Guinevere-esque miracles because they're tied to the divine family. They seem to be directly related to Guinevere, if not Guinevere herself. The Artorias sword that you can get from the Abyss Watcher's soul is actually a really good example of what I think the game is doing, similar to Dark Souls 2. This would be a Dark Souls 2-esque scenario here. I'd almost cite it directly because the soul itself is tied to the blood of the Wolf Covenant, and the Abyss Watchers have shared in the blood. The description actively says that their souls are one with the Wolf Blood Master. And the Wolf Knight's Greatsword acknowledges Artorias as the master of the Wolf Blood of Farron. So the Abyss Watchers are sharing the same soul and are in identity the same as Artorias. But obviously they're not the same. Um, this is not the case for every circumstance, by the way. This needs to be reiterated time and time again so I don't get uh, hate mail or whatever. A good example that's counter here is Aldrich's Miracle of Life Hunt site. And that's notable in many ways, but none of which I think would qualify Aldrich as a literal Priscilla reincarnation. Instead, I think the miracle is trying to say other things. First of all, it's a miracle and not the original weapon. Second, Aldrich essentially received the miracle from a dream. Third, he receives that dream as he's eating Gwendolyn. To me, this can either imply that as he's eating, he's dreaming of something anti-life. So he's dreaming of death. Eating someone alive is associated with death. I hope I don't have to explain why. This is, how we can see more Nito parallels here. But it could imply that Gwendolyn also has a relationship to Priscilla, or another pale girl in hiding, like Yorshka, who's Gwendolyn's sister. So that'd be a crazy coincidence. But to be clear, Priscilla is also the only figure with the site. So assuming it's Priscilla is the safest assumption. There's so many ways to read and receive this answer, but none of them, I don't think, are Aldrich is now Priscilla. I don't think that's the reality. Um, I think probably the most likely thing is the Gwendolyn connection. Anyways, the Cursed Rotted Greatwood manifests two items innately tied with hollows: Lucatiel's Greatsword and the Arstor Spear. I think this is because the Greatwood is so intrinsically tied with the undead curse, and these items are cursed and are returning. Or perhaps the Cursed Rotted Greatwood has absorbed these two specific hollows or something. Either way, I don't think the tree is literally Lucatiel or Arstor. It's saying something else regarding the curse, and what it does to creatures. Let's talk about how areas respond to this legacy of fire and dark really quick. Try to understand how the world structures are built to decide for you, leaving you as an undead with no choice. Mira is a kingdom surrounded by enemies in Dark Souls 2. Has a heavy focus on combat. If you're strong enough to make a name for yourself and your family, you're strong enough to be, recognized. The Shield of Mira states this sort of focus on soldiers giving their lives for their nation. That's what defines Mira, nationalism. Now, Mira seems to be a bit more complicated spot once we get to Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, it seems by most accounts Mira is part of the Sunless Realms. As you can see, that's plural, and Irithyll Valley and Orlando play a clear role in the Sunless Realms. This means that Mira is no longer enemies to its neighbors. It got conquered, in most likelihood, especially considering that the Mira's shield is now the Sunset Shield. The Sunless Shield actually talks about the shield's design as if it harbors or opposes flame. It represents both ideologies. So what the fuck does that mean? Well, with the previous context of the Mirror Shield, we can see that whoever created this shield means that nationalism takes precedence over ideology. That is, if the kingdom of Mira decided tomorrow that the Age of Dark was good, the soldiers of Mira would support that decision. And that's fucking one of the pitfalls of nationalism, boy. I'm sure to take political notes as far as decision making goes. Anyways, Mira has now been absorbed into the Sunless Realms and now is into the fold of standard Dark Moon ideology. The cycle here has those lines blurred. People aren't really sure what to believe and what to know. And Dark Souls, as a franchise, frames rulers and monarchs as the kinds of leaders to make these decisions for common people, or at least unite them. And keep these common people in ignorance. You know, think of that as patronizing if you want. I do. Anyways, other ways this back and forth regurgitation happens is through actual systems and institutions. Lothric is a kingdom dedicated to linking the flame. And Lothric's Firelink Shrine seems to have an entire system in place to ensure linking happens even when something fails. There's an entire system for linkers, for Lords of Cinder who don't want to link again and leave their throne, for Ashen Ones, for the undead who are bound by the shrine. For the very firekeepers we see as mountains of corpses, it's all happened before and it's a curse. More importantly, people who have worked very hard to ensure this will happen again. And I'm not being figurative when I just call this a curse. I'm not saying it's a curse in a metaphor sense. I'm saying it literally. The maiden literally talks as if the shrine itself, the property, has a curse to it. What is this curse that takes hold of people and traps them? It's the curse of the shrine, the curse of the institution. I talked similarly about the echoes of Kaitha and Morn to Irina and Aegon in the last major video I did. A good example I didn't talk about, but would also line up for Irina and Aegon, is that Aegon's shield is in the visage of his sister, moaning and wailing. It's unsure if it's literally his sister, and they're using maidens to transform into other things or what. Maybe, who knows. It's not out of the realm for Kareem. Kareem has a history of bite rings, and the Earl of Arstor's practices to sacrifice people to embed them into items. So it's totally possible it's a sister. It's possible it's not. Anyways, even if it's not, it's still granted to Aegon upon knighthood, as if his own identity as a knight is to protect the maiden Irina, and is likewise built and protected by the idea of another maiden's suffering. The safety of the two is built on the moaning of Aegon's sister. It is built on that suffering. We'll see this time and time again. Mountains of firekeeper corpses. I don't know how more subtle Dark Souls 3 is about imagery. It's not very subtle, I don't think. Anyways, another way that we could see echoing patterns is through the idea of darkness and want lasting, which is really important to talk about because we've been talking about flame this entire time and light this entire time. Let's talk shit about dark real quick. The Pursuer spell and Manus generally are the best examples of this sort of innate humanity and the eternal desire echoing into the future. I don't personally believe, for the record, as a side note, that Manus is the furtive pygmy. He can be. What matters here is why we see Pursuers remain. And I don't think it's because of the strength of a Lord Soul. I think it's because of emotions. I think it's because Manus had strong emotions. Why we see Manus able to stretch across time to retrieve a pendant, such a silly little thing. Fucking useless. Why we see after Manus's fall, the shards still exist and manifest into Daughters of Desire. It's because these human emotions, fundamentally rooted in desire, transcend time and echo throughout history. These fragments of desire are the essence of humanity and shape many dark sorceries and hexes. Suffering shapes many dark sorceries and hexes. These fragments of desire turn into entire beings, capable of ruining nations. Most importantly, items can remember the past. Items have memory. That's what's special about the dark here, is it carries the memories and dreams from before and impresses it onto its host or its victim, if you want. A good example would be the Executioner's Sword in the blood of its victims in Dark Souls 3, or the Dragon Slayer armor in the Ringed City of Dark Souls 3. The Dragon Slayer armor remembers the hunt. The Executioner's Sword remembers the blood of its victims. Likewise, the dregs still wishing to possess the Merkmen bodies and rise above the ashes of the dreg heap are evidence that even when rotted and heavy, humanity is still desperately trying to cling to life. Any more dark explorations, and that deserves its own video, and I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to talk about it a little bit and realize that, hey, this is part of the curse too. It even says dregs bind the world and shackle the world in its own way. So that's very important to realize as a curse. Our essence is innately tied to desire in the material world. That can take many forms, and in a way, all forms manifest from that essential emotion and being, from that want and desire. This too is a curse. Our emotions can be natural, and if we're allowed to feel everything and anything, in a way, we're free. You can feel however you want. but we can also be slaves to our emotions. I stated pleasure earlier with the embedded, but even something like anger or hatred are rooted in desire. And these negative emotions are what lasts so long. These are the things that have echoes, these are the things that are violent. And they have so much staying power. These negative emotions are what remain from Manus into Dark Souls 2. Wrath, solitude, fear. These are dark emotions that cause violence. They're curses too. Um, the prolonging of the material world also serves as a meta commentary. Surely I'm not the first person you've ever heard of in Dark Souls lore that talks about the idea of Dark Souls 3 as the statement of Dark Souls as a franchise. I'm not going to claim that I come up with this. This is old as shit from the first fucking time you played the game. This idea that you don't see new things, that it's all repetition and it's stagnating and it's becoming lesser. The derivatives are Xerox copies, and Xeroxing a copy of a copy is getting a little bad. Um, that's the core concept of the plot, and the forces are at work to ensure that there will be a Dark Souls 4 eventually one day. And it's to ensure that we won't have a truly new and brilliant Age of Fire. Instead, we are constantly linking to perpetuate what we have instead of closing the book on the franchise and letting new stories be told. I can continue to go on here, but it would all be variations of what's been already said with some twists. Again, this is a system of life that exists, and it's both because of life and used to perpetuate itself to an almost sinister degree. Do we embrace the light of day and ensure we never see the dark come? Do we let the night come to ensure another day will come? Do we try to stick through it all? Do we just try to escape it all? Madness and possession and love and hate and every emotion being rolled into these reoccurring archetypes and roles, playing the same thing over and over again. This is the cycle of karma. The cultural touchstones of these different kingdoms also perpetuate these roles. To talk in a much more smaller sense, Sigvard, I don't know how to pronounce it, is Sigmire. It's just a different name. You know that when you played it. But why did they just reuse a Sigmire? It's because it's all a curse, and it's because that culture is raising Sigwards. It's raising Sigmires. It's just producing them. It's a curse we can't escape. Or even if we could escape it, we don't know if we should or we don't know how. And I think that's the note to end on. Thanks for being patient, y'all. This is a really hard topic to go over. And even I'm not super satisfied with the structure of it. There's a lot I didn't talk about. And I just wanted you to know that if I addressed every little character or plotline pattern, I'd be here till the end of forever. I think what I did was essential for the video and talking about how Dark Souls 2 handles this cycle. And I mentioned the deviations Dark Souls 3 did that sort of justify and sort of examine the entirety of the series. If you've got a detail or something you really feel compelled to say that I missed, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. I definitely intentionally left stuff out. After this video, I'm unsure of what my next FromSoft video is. No idea. Maybe it's going to be a Bloodborne video. If it's a Bloodborne video, it's not going to be a normal one. You're not going to be ready for it. But maybe you'll stick around. I normally plug Discord servers or something, but I'm actually going to advertise a bunch of channels that I like. The first channel is Rubido's. The Red Scholar he has a pinwheel video that's great. He's a personal friend of mine, and I hope he makes another one soon. We collaborate a lot. Herbert West is a great Bloodborne contributor and generally has great analysis and insights. Last Protagonist is a translator, and he probably doesn't need me to plug him because he's pretty big, but I will because I think it'd be rude if I didn't. A lot of content both from streams and scripted content. He has a lot of content if you're eager for that content. He helped me understand Bloodborne a bit more too, and he tries to question things we take for granted, which I think is important to an extent. And Eredin is also a guy with a lot of content. Eredin is a cool guy. He's on top of Elden Ring content, which I will never be. I'm gonna be awful at Elden Ring content, and he also does lore playthroughs like Last Protagonist does. And he's one of those people that analyzes every aspect of the design from the geography to the architecture, and he takes his time to really like just think about it. Sometimes even he admits it's to an absurd point, but it's also really useful whenever you do find something and you're like, well, maybe you're right. I dig all of these content creators, and if you're eager for content, be sure to check them out. If you have requests for something you'd like me to discuss, feel free to mention it below as well. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And this is late for Christmas, but have a Merry Christmas. I wrote this before Christmas, and I'm recording it on Christmas Eve, bleeding into Christmas Day when everyone is asleep. But I did it for you all, and I love you for it. Have a wonderful night. Ho, ho, ho. Okay,